the final part of the story from John chapter 9. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man Jesus is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I've told you already, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Well, then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from." The man answered, "Well, here's an astonishing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found the man, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'd like to invite all the kids up front for the children's message. Come on up. So if you have kids who are going off to Sunday school, you have to pay attention, because you know after church they're asking you today, "So why were those people so mad?" I'll tell you, it'll be okay. All right. Well, it's easy to watch World War II movies and think, boy, if I had lived in Germany back then, I would have helped my Jewish neighbors escape. Or to read about slavery in our own country and think, how could anyone have ever thought that owning another person was okay? I mean, I know I've said those things to myself. Maybe you have too. I think all of us hope that we would do the right thing if we had been there. But it is incredibly difficult to fully understand the risks, the pressures, and the cultural ideas of a time and place if you haven't lived it. Today we've got this fantastic story from another place and time. Jesus heals a man who was born blind, and from where we're standing, it makes no sense that people get mad at Jesus. Doesn't make a bit of sense. If this happened today and somebody was healed, we might call in some experts, to see if they could explain it. We'd do our due diligence to make sure the man was indeed born blind before, so we would know we weren't being duped. But if everything checked out, we'd be happy for the guy, right? If he was a friend of ours or a relative, we would just flip out with excitement as soon as we heard that he could see. Okay? We'd tell everybody what happened. And that makes sense in this time and place. But first century Israel was a whole different ballgame. Okay? So today we're going to try to unpack what was going on back then, to understand why this healing upset the Pharisees so much, and what was at stake for the man and for his parents when they were questioned. Okay? And this is part of a sermon series called Were You There? A series where we look at what happened in Jesus' life, how it impacted the people around him, and the people with power at the time. A series where we do a little time traveling to understand what went on, which will hopefully give us some compassion for the risks people took and some understanding of why the leaders wanted Jesus dead. If you are a visual person like me and you want the words in front of you while we're talking about the story, it's in your pew Bibles on page 871. Page 871, John chapter 9. All right, so now get your time machine ready. Turn in the dials to the first century, The location, Jerusalem. Let's go. There was a man born blind, and Jesus heals him. Okay. In verse 8, as the man's neighbors try to understand what happened, we learn that the man had been a beggar. In first century Israel, that makes sense. Being blind in that day and age, he couldn't work, couldn't have a job, had no way to support himself, so he begged. Okay. Once the man can see, people asked him what happened, and he tells them it was Jesus. So the people take him to the Pharisees. Now, why do they take him to the Pharisees? I don't know. Maybe they just wanted the due diligence questions asked, and they figured the Pharisees were the good guys to do that. I don't know, but they took him there. And the big problem number one anyway, is that Jesus healed the man on a Sabbath day. Verse 14 tells us, not allowed, not allowed. According to Jewish law, you cannot work on the Sabbath. It is a holy day of rest, and healing someone who has been blind for years, I'm sorry, that is not an emergency. Okay? He could have been healed the next day, no big deal. Didn't have to be done that day. So in verse 16, now we've got the Pharisees arguing with each other, debating about Jesus. Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Is he from God or is he evil? Well, they can't decide. Some of the Pharisees say he's bad because he healed on the Sabbath. Okay? And some say he must be good because he healed this man. They're stuck. They're stuck. So they ask the man who was born blind what he thinks about Jesus. And the man says, he's a prophet. Okay? And where do prophets come from? From God. Okay? And the Pharisees have to be in their bonnet about this. That cannot be right. Can't be that Jesus is from God. So they call the man's parents now, and they ask them about the healing and about Jesus. The parents confirm the healing, but they refuse to answer questions about Jesus. Okay? And this is not your typical, he's an adult, we're going to be respectful and let him speak for himself kind of thing. No. This is, we plead the fifth. Okay? They are asked a direct question during the course of an investigation, and they refuse to answer. Why? Verse 22 says that if they say anything to indicate that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is from God, that they will be kicked out of the synagogue. They don't want to take that risk, so they say, ask our son, you know. It's like they don't want to take the risk, but apparently they're okay with their son taking the risk. You know, throw your kid under the bus. That's not nice. Okay? It doesn't sound like good parenting, does it? Okay? But we've got to remember, this is a different world. Completely different world. If the parents were kicked out of the synagogue, it wasn't like they could just go to the other synagogue down the street. Okay? Getting kicked out meant being completely cut off from the Jewish community. Okay? If they had a business, no one would go to their shop anymore, and they would lose the business. Okay? They would lose their friends. They wouldn't be able to interact with anyone from their community. And if they're keeping a kosher kitchen, which I assume they would be, good luck trying to get the butcher to serve you anymore. And now they're going to be breaking Jewish law even further. This is a big, big deal. Their livelihood and their faith depends on it. So they plead the fifth. They don't take the risk. In verse 24, the Pharisees question the man again, this time accusing Jesus of being a sinner, but the man doesn't back down. He tells the story again. He tells the truth of what he knows. He says, I don't know about Jesus, but I do know I can see. And the Pharisees accuse the man of following Jesus. They say they know that God spoke to Moses, so they're following Moses, but this Jesus guy, we don't know where he's from. And the man who was healed just loses it. He just blows his stack. He cannot understand what is wrong with these Pharisees. Jesus healed him, so by the Pharisees' own logic, Jesus must be from God. And I love verses 32 and 33. The man says, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. I read that, and I want to go climb up on a chair somewhere and do a slow clap. Like, yes, yes. It's like he's saying what everybody in the modern world is thinking. It's like, of course, what is wrong with these Pharisees? But again, first century Jerusalem. It's somewhere else, okay? So first century Jerusalem, the Pharisees kick the man out of the synagogue. They assume that he was born blind because of sin, either his own sin or his parents' sin, which Jesus says is not true, by the way, okay? Because God doesn't work like that. But that's what the Pharisees think. They think he is beneath them, so he has no right to try to tell the mighty Pharisees anything. And since he makes himself their equal by trying to tell them that Jesus is from God, never mind that they asked, they kick him out. He took the risk. He told the truth, and he got kicked out. Now, this will separate him from his family, okay? He's already on the fringes of society because he was a blind beggar before, but he's really on the outside now. Now he's removed from the religious community and all that that entails. And at the end of the story, Jesus seeks him out and tells him who he is, that he is from God, and the man worships him. Okay. All right, so take your time machine, dial it back to East Bethel, 2017. And now that you've experienced that first century scene in Jerusalem, let me ask you something. When you think about the man's parents now, do you just think they were horrible parents? Or do you have some understanding as to why they remained silent about Jesus being from God? Is there some compassion for the choice they faced? When you think of the man who was healed, does it make a little more sense now as to why the Pharisees got so mad at him saying that Jesus was from God? That might still be a little fuzzy. So let me tell you a couple more things about the Pharisees. The Pharisees assumed that Jesus was a false Messiah, okay? There were magicians and charlatans around pretending to heal people, so the Pharisees were skeptical. And if Jesus was the Messiah, and the Messiah was healing on the Sabbath, which violated one of the oldest Jewish laws ever, what was that going to mean? Okay. If it were true, everything would have been turned upside down. They wouldn't be able to count on the law anymore, and that was the Pharisees' specialty. So Jesus' growing influence was a threat to their power as religious leaders and to their entire understanding of God and how God works. So when the man who was healed says that Jesus is from God, after he healed him on the Sabbath, Pharisees are upset because they don't know what it means. Okay? Now it makes a little sense, doesn't it? We might not agree, but we can kind of understand where they're coming from. Ultimately, the Pharisees end up acting out of fear, and they help to plot Jesus' death. Okay. If you were there, what would you have done? It's hard to say, isn't it? It's hard to say. And since we can't know what we would do in anyone else's shoes, here's what I want all of us to do this week. Think about being in your own shoes. As a follower of Jesus, in this time and place, called to spread God's love and to shine Christ's light in the world, is there a risk that needs to be taken? Personally, I'm thinking about the increased anti-Semitism and the fear of Muslims in our country. And I'm wondering if I need to stand up and say, Muslims and Jews trace their heritage back to Abraham just like we Christians do. They are our brothers and sisters in the faith, cousins at the very least. And our God is a God of peace and love, not hatred and violence. Those are my shoes that I'm thinking about. What are yours? What are your shoes? And what risk do you need to take this week to spread God's love? Amen.